Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us today as we have a very important and difficult conversation. To those of you who are watching, I'd like to introduce our champions of healthy manhood. These men are allies and leaders in violence prevention, as well as leaders in the healthy manhood movement here in West Michigan. So fellas, if you don't mind, just go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself. My name is Brad Heathia. I'll pass it off to Bob first.
Bob Rembrandt, work at Global Concepts.
Dan Newey.
Blake Andrea.
Evening, everybody. Brandon Melnick.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And so before we kind of dive in today, we have a panel discussion, some questions that we want to cover. But before we do so, I think it's important to provide a little context as to why we're having this conversation. A little over a month ago now, May 24th in Uvalde, Texas, an 18-year-old young man fatally shot and killed 19 students and 2 teachers at an elementary school, shot and wounded 17 others, and also shot his own grandmother earlier that day. And we know that after these tragic events unfold, usually what we hear is thoughts and prayers to the families, to the victims, to the communities. But with all due respect, thoughts and prayers, they're not enough. And we, as champions of healthy manhood, believe that we must act. And I'd like to encourage all of you who are listening to please consider joining us in this movement. If you are a father, teacher, a coach, business or faith leader, parent, just anyone out there who's interested in helping us change the culture that has led to so many shootings, we can't do this alone. And we desperately need you on our side having these conversations. The 18-year-old young man who carried out this awful act legally purchased 2 AR-15 semi-automatic rifles the day after he turned 18 years old. He also legally purchased 1,657 rounds of ammunition, as well as a trigger modification that made the weapon fire faster. And when it was all said and done that day, the Uvalde mass shooting became the 3rd deadliest school shooting in US history, behind Virginia Tech and Sandy Hook. And what I'd like to do is take a moment to respect the victims and the families by reading off the names of those who lost their lives that day. And I ask you to bear with me. I know this is going to be a difficult minute, but we believe that it's important in spaces like this to honor the victims and the families. Nevaeh Bravo, 10 years old. Jacqueline Casares, 9 years old. McKenna Elrod, 10 years old. Jose Flores, 10 years old. Aliana Garcia, 9 years old. Uzziah Garcia, 10 years old. Amarie Garcia, 10 years old. Javier Lopez, 10 years old. JC Livanos, 10 years old. Tess Mata, 10 years old. Miranda Mathis, 11 years old. Alethea Ramirez, 10 years old. Annabelle Rodriguez, 10 years old. Maite Rodriguez, 10 years old. Alexandria Rubio, 10 years old. Layla Salazar, 11 years old. Hyla Seguero, 10 years old. Aliana Torres, 10 years old. Rogelio Torres, 10 years old. Irma Garcia, 48 years old. And Ava Morales, 44 years old. As I said, usually we say thoughts and prayers to the family, but that is not enough. We must come together and change the culture. We must come together and redefine what it means to be a man in this culture, and to redefine the definition of manhood, because for so long it has been defined on power, control, aggression, dominance, and violence. And we all deserve better. We all deserve to be safe and respected, and to not worry when we leave our homes. And so what I'd like to do now is open it up to our amazing men here, our champions of healthy manhood, with our first question, which is, if you think back to last month, when maybe you first learned about what was happening or what had happened in Uvalde, can you recall what your initial reaction was? What maybe you were feeling or thinking? And if you're willing to share that, I think it would be very powerful and important. So to whoever would like to go first, your reaction to when you first learned about what was happening in Uvalde.
I think my reaction, Brad, was just totally shocked. And I felt so sorry for the parents who had to wait a long time to find out if their child was alive or dead. And it's just very, very emotional to me. And I felt so bad for the children and for the parents. It just was devastating.
I'm unfortunately not shocked by it anymore. It's not really surprising to me, and I find myself having to actively kind of fight against that numbness, and for lots of the reasons that we'll kind of get into here. It shouldn't feel inevitable, but I think we know that there's going to be more of these things happening, which I think might shock some people that might hear this, but it's going to happen again. And that part is almost just as hard as hearing the news for the first time, is knowing that there's still a long way to go in preventing these sorts of events again.
My first reaction was one of grief and emotions that go along with grief. And it was grief for the parents and the families who should never have to think, is my kid going to be coming home alive from school? As schools are supposed to be places of safety and security and stability. And as monotonous as that might seem, right? I drop my kid off at the bus, I drop my kid off at school, I pick my kid home. For all these families involved, they didn't, and they weren't able to. And they weren't able to because of systems in place that allow a newly minted 18-year-old to not just purchase assault rifles, but to better equip himself to do that. And as the grieving process continues for everybody involved, in directly or indirectly, because grief is a process, the same systems are still in place. So as Blake, you said, it's going to happen because it's allowed to happen. It's been happening for years upon years upon years, and the thoughts and prayers, Brad, they're not enough. Because if they were, Why is it happening? Yet it's the people making the decisions or not making the decisions, deciding not to make decisions, that are sending the thoughts and prayers. That's what privilege looks like. And yet these families will always be grieving. And where it hurts me the most is that these are very, very young people whose futures were taken away from them. And the person who committed murder time and time over and over gets a slap on the wrist. That is not equity at all. So that's where I was initially, and I'm still very much there, because we shouldn't be living in fear of it happening again. But because of what's in place, it sadly will, as history has proven.
For me, I mean, initially, I think I can relate to a little bit of everything that's already been said. Shock, but also a numbness, because I said, again, you know, of course, that this is happening again. And I remember calling my brother and telling him, hey, did you hear about what happened in Texas? And, you know, he said no. And I just said, you know, there's another school shooting. And he goes, oh my gosh, another one. And like, that's stuck with me the last month or so, that's where we're at. Like, it's not as shocking, because it's another one. There's how many have happened in the past 15 years that you can think of, and there's a bunch of them that come to mind, and that's heartbreaking in itself. But this one was obviously the freshest one, front and center. I have a school-age child now, so that kind of hit a little harder for me, because I was able to put myself in those parents' shoes and watching that all unfold that day. And the more we've learned about how everything unfolded that day, the would have, the could have, the should have, of the response, I think that unfortunately is a bad thing that happened, how it was reacted upon by authorities and all that. But I also think that's taking away from the bigger picture here, because I think the blame is getting put on those men that responded in some way. Whether they were right or wrong in what they did, the blame lies in the 18-year-old that walked into that school with two AR-15s. And we need to keep the focus there and not figure out how to arm teachers, arm, you know, response time. We need to figure out how to keep that kid from wanting or going into that school in the first place. And I think that's kind of where we're at now in what we're trying to do here is figure out that piece of it. And that's kind of what I've thought a lot about over the past 4 weeks, that this is kind of unfolded. Getting more information is kind of going back to where it started with this 18-year-old man that walked into that school. How do we prevent that?
I'm right there with you all. I appreciate everything, and again, sharing those reactions. I know for me, I remember I didn't know initially. I got a text from my mom saying, hey, did you hear? And I was cooking dinner at the time. And so I just kind of responded, no, but I'll put the news on later and learn more about it. But there wasn't a sense of urgency, like you've all said. There wasn't a sense of outrage. It was just, well, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. It's just any other night. So I finished cooking dinner for my wife and I. We ate, we cleaned up, and then I put on the news. And I remember being glued to the TV that night, just my head in my hands, thinking about the parents, you know, sobbing in front of my wife. I remember reaching out to several of you, just thinking again about you guys as dads. You know, they had some some moms that they were interviewing who lost children at Sandy Hook on the news I was watching. And they were talking about how it's going to take a while to identify everybody because of the damage that those weapons of war do to a body. And I remember the next morning, I had a class, because I teach classes on healthy relationships and healthy manhood. I had a class at middle school for 6th and 7th graders, bright and early, and they were all talking about what had happened and, you know, what would happen if it happened here, what would we do? And not only was my heart broken at that, witnessing that, but I was also just enraged that our kids have to worry about this, that they have to do drills, that our parents have to worry about this. So just heartbroken and enraged at the state of our nation. And I appreciate what you're saying, Dan, and that's exactly what we're going to go into next. Thinking about the root cause of this. Why is this happening? Why has it happened for so long? And what can we do? What can we do as a community to hopefully prevent this from happening again? And so with that, I'd like to shift gears. One thing that we do as champions of healthy manhood is we examine gender, we examine our culture, specifically the definition of masculinity and how that's played out every day across the country, the values that we're taught, the rules that we're taught, what we're told we can and can't do as men, what we're told to value. And what we see time and time again is that, especially in cases of mass shootings, it's always men who are the ones pulling the trigger. Over 98% of the time. So almost every single mass shooting in history is carried out by a man. And most of the time they're very young. I believe, 18 to 23 years of age. Most of the time they're white, and most of the time they leave behind social media posts or letters or manifestos talking about their anger, their rage. So my question to you guys is, why is it always men? Why is this a root cause of this gun violence in your eyes?
I think as men, I think we've kind of been taught that we have, to be a man in the traditional sense is a very one-dimensional caricature of ourselves. We are supposed to basically have access to, I always say 2 basic emotions, right? It's anger or nothing. So, it's stoic men or men being angry, and that's kind of how it's portrayed in the media and in movies and that sort of thing. And that's kind of what makes a man. And, I obviously, since we've been together and talking, we've read through a lot of the research and we can kind of dissect that. But I know that in my soul as a man, I know that just intrinsically, what was offered to me. I mean, I remember being a young man and being incredibly angry and not really understanding why. And it's probably because I was feeling other emotions. And so, I do everything I could to mute those emotions and not pay attention to them. Right. So it meant making poor impulsive choices. I think a lot of men do it with drugs and alcohol, and I certainly wasn't above that when I was younger. But a number of other, poor decisions as well, because I think more than anything, you just kind of want the pain to stop. And there's not a healthy way to do that with the traditional model of manhood.
Piggybacking off of that idea and concepts that you mentioned, Blake, is as men, we don't know how to handle ourselves. And as we don't know how to handle ourselves, and figure ourselves out. We don't admit to that. And we think that we have power and control over everybody else. And just like, if you want to dissect that just a little bit, we have no idea what's going on with our own emotions. We won't even acknowledge what we're going through. And now we're going to tell other people how to figure themselves out. That is an unhealthy recipe. And I'm not making that up. It's based on plenty of data, plenty of research. I highly encourage you, if you're not familiar with the Man Box, to go check out Tony Porter and A Call to Men and see how our inability to figure ourselves out perpetuates systems, perpetuates sexual assault, domestic violence, mass shootings, and many other dangerous and vicious, unhealthy and risky cycles, because we are willing to point the finger and put shame and guilt and fault on everybody else, yet we are not looking ourselves in the mirror. That is what is that, in my opinion, paired with the systemic inequities in place, continue to allow, I'm going to keep it PG, crap like this to happen by very similar looking people. And almost every time that it happens, right, it's white young males, people in positions of power. And I look at myself, I am a white, fairly young, depending on who you ask, male. That is me. So why is it that I'm granted this privilege? Why can't that be me? Why isn't that me? What if that were me? These are questions I ask because, oh, it's like, prove me wrong. Nope. Society will not prove you wrong if you believe that, if you allow it to. But excuse me. It's allowed to happen because it continues to be who it is committing these mass murders and other outrageous, heinous acts, because what's stopping them? What is stopping us? And that breaks my heart in saying that, but it can really be that simple. Every single time it happens, it's not just thoughts and prayers. Congress, Senate, oh, we're going to do something. When?
I think too, I think Blake was saying that the two kind of realms that we live in as men are anger and nothing, and I like to call nothing withdrawal, because that's just kind of how I saw it for myself when I was a younger man. Those are the two outlets we had, and when you did do the withdrawal piece, you were taking the anger and putting that inside yourself. So it was a very volatile thing to do. And at times my emotions would be unpredictable. And I think, I don't quite know the stats, but I think a lot of these shootings that occur, we find out later through a letter, manifesto, something like that, or just the people that knew the person, that they were bullied a lot. And to think about that, and just getting beaten down, essentially being bullied all the time, as a man, there's aggression and dominance that comes out, and I think that's where some of this comes to a head, is these boys really don't know how to deal with what is inside them, what they've withdrawn to themselves, and they explode. I mean, and unfortunately, we've seen the results time and time again, how they're doing that, and it's through killing children and teachers and people at a supermarket. a movie theater. It's random acts of violence, and it's terrifying for not just a parent of a child, but literally now to go anywhere. It could be in the back of your head. And to speak to Brandon's point too, the man box, Tony Porter is, I mean, you look at that simple demonstration of kind of what we are as men, as a society, in the box. You can kind of say, yeah, I could definitely see where these boys are coming from outside, breaking out of this box to pretty much explode, and it's sad.
I guess, Brad, from my standpoint, I've never felt that way towards anyone. Never felt, I hated people or just didn't like people, but I never thought of harming anyone. And that just surprises me so much why that happens today. And I think this group really, if we can do things outside the box and help people like that, that will be tremendous going forward.
I think, Bob, too, to play on that point, and listening to Brandon and Dan kind of talk about this too, really the harm we're doing is that we're doing this harm to ourselves by not understanding all of these emotions. And it's not only, I mean, you can think about it ourselves as like our individual persons, but then also the community itself. Like, this isn't some outside sinister, terrorist group or something like that that's doing this.
Right.
For the most part, this is citizens of this country that we are doing this to ourselves, to our society. We're bringing this violence to ourselves, and then also, again, we're by letting that volatile emotion be bottled up, we're doing harm to ourselves, which is why we end up not living as long as women. That's like one of the many reasons that's kind of all tangled up in this and makes it unhealthy for men and boys too. There's a lot of, I guess, there's a lot of other unintended consequences that kind of go along with that as well. So, yeah.
And I guess I wonder too, with situation going on in Russia right now with Putin, do others feel that same way? Like, I want to be like him. I don't know. It just crossed my mind.
I really appreciate where we're going and with this conversation, thinking about the culture, the society, the expectations and the rules that we place on our young boys. I think it's important to say there's nothing biologically or inherently wrong with men. The issue here is how we as a society and as a culture teach gender and manhood, how we enforce it and police it, how we demand that at the age of 2 and 3 years old that boys don't cry, or that they have to, quote, man up, that they can't show any emotion, like you all said, outside of anger or frustration. This idea that they have to be tough 24/7, which means they have to disconnect from their hearts, that they can't be vulnerable, they can't ask for help, they can't help others, right? They can't be authentic and be real and be their full self. They can only be this narrow, as you said, Blake, caricature of themselves. And in doing so, that is killing them from the inside out, dehumanizing who they are. And they're doing it because they're told they have to. And it's being policed by family and friends and community because it's the social norm, it's the status quo. And so I have so much empathy as well for men and boys who are living in this system that are told that that's the only way they can be. The other part that I think is important, another statistic we saw, 98% of the shooters are men, but almost 70% of mass shootings the past 5 years, the shooters have had a history of domestic violence. And so I'd like to kind of get your take on that. Is why is it that these men, when they do the background checks, as you said, Dan, a lot of them are bullied, but we also see a lot of them are engaging in domestic violence, specifically against women and girls. We also see a lot of homophobia as well when you look at social media posts that they have or instances that they've had with people in schools. Why is there that intersection? What do you think?
So for me, this starts at the power and control wheel. And if you're unfamiliar with that, that's totally fine. If you want to look at that, the interwebs can assist you with that, or resilience advocates for ending violence can assist you with that. But the power and control wheel says, and what toxic masculinity say collectively are, the more of these two things that you have, the more power and the more control you have, the more dominant that you are, the more people will respect you. So if you are able to show dominance in the bedroom, in intimate partner relationships, however you want to define that, and you have, in the context of this, you have a ton of guns, people are going to respect you. They will look up to you. You are in control. You have all of the power. People want to be like you. You are modeling unhealthy, dangerous, and risky behavior to them, because going back to, you can't figure yourself out. Not only can't you figure yourself out, you will not acknowledge that you need to be figured out. We are all worthy of figuring ourselves out. Let's be honest with ourselves. And I believe that these statistics are all pointing in the very same direction, where we want to be surprised and we want to be shocked, but are we? I'm not. I really want to convince myself to be, but am I surprised that upwards of 70% of mass shooters over the last 5 years have a history of sexual assault and or domestic violence? No, because they fall under the same umbrella. We can't figure ourselves out, and you're modeling what you think is healthy, but as countless data and countless research shows, it is very dangerous, not just for yourself, but for those closest to you. And that is scary. That is scary. And it should not continue to be allowed to happen, but yet it is.
I think, Brandon, too, to I guess elaborate on that too, is it's almost like a dress rehearsal, right? It's getting kind of that taste and understanding, and then I'd also say, when you're talking about kind of figuring it out, misunderstanding respect for fear, right? Because we're so disconnected from our emotions. If we can't understand ourselves, how can we understand what others might be feeling? You know, that empathy piece, like if they may be afraid, and that's why maybe they're nervously laughing when somebody says something, you know, off color, or when somebody threatens violence, and they see fear and they think that that's, oh, somebody respecting me. Again, it's because we have this twisted idea of what it means, what it's supposed to mean to be a man, and I think you put that together, and it's where I completely agree with you. Like I wish I was more surprised, but it almost feels inevitable when you really sit back and kind of understand the culture that we're
And also, like, it's almost like we're trying to one up each other, because most. I mean, you ask the vast majority of guys, they like competition. Oh, you did this? Watch me. It perpetuate yeah, it just perpetuates a lot of danger.
Yeah, I think that's true. One has to try to outdo the other.
I think, Blake, I think you made a good point with the, assuming fear is power and dominance. And I mean, that's the reaction to that. They feel like they've received that in some way. And I mean, it only goes up from there, right? To get a little bit further down the road to turn 18 and going to buy your first gun or whatever it is, because that's going to be the next thing that makes you feel powerful, because that's going to put fear in someone too. Yeah, it's just the culture that we've created for people to live in, and that's what has to change. Is from kind of look at those things, the anger, hate, loneliness, gun obsession, misogyny, homophobia, all those things shouldn't be looked at as a dominating factor, but really look at it as a cry for help, like not so much from the person, but like for the people around them too. Like we should be looking at those as signs that person needs help and needs guidance, and that's where I think we're losing it.
But how was that culture developed? I mean, what happened?
Yeah, I really love the question, Bob, because I think in order for us to kind of change the culture and change our future, we have to understand how we got here.
Right.
And as all of you are sharing, the word that keeps coming back to in my mind is patriarchy, which for those of you who maybe aren't too familiar, right, it's this cultural system that has been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, that has said that men are superior, and it finds ways to justify that, whether that's biology or religion or you name it. Over time, it has evolved, but this idea that men are dominant, men are superior, this idea that we have to be the ones who are in control, that we are the ones that have to be respected and listened to. And this is something that hurts everybody. And I think that's what we're hearing throughout this conversation, is that patriarchy doesn't just hurt women and girls and LGBTQ folks. Very much it hurts all of our men and boys as well. It's something from a young age that it's something that's dehumanizing us, that we can't be our full selves, that we can't express our emotions, that we can't ask for help, all the things that we've said. And I think, Dan, you mentioned loneliness. I know there's a statistic that 1 in 5 men in our culture feel lonely every day. 1 in 5. There's this epidemic of loneliness among men, and yet we can't show it. We can't talk about it. And the solution to loneliness is connection. And we can't do that either, because connection requires vulnerability, authenticity, empathy, all things that we have deemed feminine, and therefore men cannot be associated with. So again, as we move forward, we have to abolish this patriarchal system. We have to find the root cause and wipe it out, and instead plant something that is based on love and respect and empathy and equality, equity. And I know it's not going to be easy, but that's why we need you all who are listening to help us in this movement. Regardless of who you are, you have tremendous power in helping shape culture, whether that's within your own family or your workplace, your place of worship. We all have an ability to create conversation and relationships and help move the needle. And so I'd like to kind of move in this direction as we kind of wrap up tonight with a bit of hope. Thinking about those who are listening, what is it that maybe we can do? What can we do locally as folks, and especially as men in West Michigan, but also culturally? What are things that we can do to try and prevent mass shootings, to try and create safer communities? What's your advice to people out there listening?
I think one of the things I'd like to say, Brad, is that, you know, this group, all of the group, has really made me feel so comfortable in talking about things that I've never felt like I could talk about before. And I think if others start to feel that same way, that's going to change a lot of things going forward. But I'm so comfortable talking to anyone right now because of this group. So thanks again, Blake, for introducing me to Brad.
Bob, thanks for being a part of this and really being vulnerable and engaging, even though, you know, you didn't start out knowing a ton about it, but obviously it resonated.
Yep.
So, thank you. I think for me, you know, I've kind of come to this journey because of Parkland was really that was really kind of the breaking point. Obviously, having kids, and my kids are right now are the age of the kids in Uvalde, but you know, so Sandy Hook, it was right before they went to school, and then Parkland just really hit me as well. And you know, I think one of the ways that I've kind of introduced it to the people that I talk to, and you know, for me, it's just kind of doing a daily thing, kind of like what Bob's saying, like talking to those that are open to it. And I find that most anybody that knows me, and you know, I have friends all over the political spectrum and culturally that are different from me, but they're all willing to kind of have the conversation. So I think it starts with kind of your closest group. And one of the first places that I send them is The Boys Are Not All Right, the New York Times article by Michael Ian Black. And I think also like introducing to other materials, like Brandon and Dan mentioned, Tony Porter, are also great. But I think it at least starts to help with that context and the vocabulary around the things that we're talking about, because you know, it feels if you're just kind of in the day-to-day, things seem normal, but when you really take a step back and think about it, you know, these things aren't, it doesn't have to be the way that it is. So that's kind of been my approach, and just kind of introducing it to people.
For me, I think a big part of this is, as a father and as uncle, as a brother, as a son, as all the hats we wear, modeling what healthy manhood has been something that that I've really, you know, hit the ground running with, and it kind of really exploded with my son, and you know, I've taken it everywhere in all my relationships from there, with other men, talking to women about it too. But you know, you think about the cliche, you know, my dad brought me in the basement and taught me to fight when I was 5, right? Not teaching how to throw a punch, or you see it in movies a lot where a father figure teaches the boy how to defend himself, right? Or angrily telling a small child, usually a boy, to not cry. Why are you crying? And then, you know, in turn, turning around to their sister or cousin of the opposite sex and really doing a 180 and empathizing with that child and giving them a hug and trying to find out what's wrong. I've seen it in my circle, and it's just modeling what we want for the future that I think is going to be really powerful going forward. And again, like you guys have all said so far, the conversation, there's all kinds of places and little nuances you can find to put in there. It doesn't have to be a in your face conversation, but it can be a question in a long conversation that just hints at it. And there are other times where you can make it the conversation rather than just a part of it. But it's finding that and then learning the language and doing a little bit of research on how, you know, so you can be ready for those moments too. And I think over the last 4 months, all of us have gotten a lot more comfortable in those settings and with that information. So that's kind of my take on what we can do locally and for the future.
This is supposed to be our call to action as the call to action team, because we're very literal people. My first call to action is for anybody who sees this is not right now, shortly after, go look in the mirror and tell yourself 3 things that you love about yourself, especially if you're guys. Like, actually do that. Doesn't matter if it's the first time you're doing this. It doesn't matter if you've done it before. Go look in the mirror and confidently say 3 things that you love about yourself. If you're a little uncomfortable with that, 3 things you'd like about yourself, right? I do this every morning. I do this every night before I go to bed, and I'm weird, and that's okay. I can embrace that. Do that, make it become a habit. I've said other things within this group, and y'all questioning me like, does that work? But then you're also trying that. So, you know, I appreciate that. My second call to action is reach out to Brad and get involved in this work, because you're probably already doing at least some of it without even knowing it. Sometimes, a lot of the times as guys, we like to just complicate things because that's how we're made up. It makes us more impressionable. Reach out to Brad. He'll probably give his contact information. He sometimes gets really bored and doesn't know what to do, so give him something. Or if you don't like Brad because he's wearing a shirt that says protect kids and not guns, as we're talking about gun violence and how it is our behavior that perpetuates this to continue happening, among a lot of other things, go to resiliencemi.org and there's contact information there. But inevitably with this work, you're going to end up with Brad. So there's the face. So thanks, Brad, for being the face. My third call to action is gain some knowledge on community resources. If you don't know where they are, I mentioned resilience, go to 211.com or .org. It is a statewide resource. Type in your zip code where you're looking for resources and they can get you connected there. If you want to call literally 211. Don't dial 9, dial 211, and they can get you connected to resources. Another call to action is, Dan, you mentioned it, model emotions. I'm a super open person. I'm very much an open book. I'm very emotional, and the man box says that makes me weak. I've learned to accept that, but I've also learned that I'm part of the solution more than I am part of the problem. Model that, and don't just model it for your own sake. Model it because, especially if you have kids, they're our future, and we don't want what is happening to continue to happen. Have conversations. Some other guys have mentioned, you know, we're comfortable in here. I think that's too easy. I appreciate that. I accept that. But if we want to see even small changes happen, we have to push ourselves and be uncomfortable. We have to talk about things that we haven't talked about before. We have to do things that we haven't talked about before. So push yourself to the edge of your comfort box. Like if this is your comfort box right here, take like half a step outside of it. And then you'll notice the changes. And then that's when it becomes more comfortable for you. And if you keep on doing that, we're just going to keep on growing, not individually, but collectively. That's what we need to do. So just some, I believe they're small steps, but they can make the biggest changes.
I love what everybody has had to say. It makes me again hopeful because we just listed, you know, dozens of opportunities and options. That said, you know, we're fighting a system that's again thousands of years in the making. It's not easy, but we don't have to do this alone. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that in this journey that I've been on, this healthy manhood journey, I've met some of the most amazing people, like the guys that are, you know, next to me on the screen, but men who care, good men who are loving and kind and passionate and nurturing. And I would say that for me, what changed my life was vulnerability and connection. The ability to, even though it's awkward and uncomfortable, to open my heart to those around me, to be in community, you know, to get to know people, to show up, to be there, to learn, to laugh, to love. And in moments like this, where it hurts, to be there with someone who's hurting too. And not to make the pain go away, but just to be there for each other. And I think that's what we offer. And Blake, someone who inspires me, you know, talks a lot about grace and understanding, and that this is a place where we have that for you, a safe place for us as men to come and to gather, to connect and to learn. We don't have all the answers, and sometimes we stumble in the darkness trying to figure this out, but we're intentional on just trying to become the best version of ourselves, and as a result trying to help our community become a better and safer place. And so to anyone out there who would like to know more, who might be interested, maybe it's just tugging on you a little bit, we want to get to know you. We want to have coffee with you. We want to talk about your family and your hobbies, and we want to laugh with you. And so please consider joining us. We would love for you to be a part of this, and we need you. And so with that, I'd like to just give everybody a chance. If there's anything that you have that you'd like to share before we end tonight, could be a message of hope. It could be a message of resiliency or empathy, but anything weighing on you that you'd like to share before we close tonight.
I just think, Brad, we all have a big, huge opportunity to help people, and helping people is going to change everything and make it more positive.
Absolutely. Well said, Bob. Thank you. Anything else, guys?
Thank you for delivering the message of grace. I really appreciate that. That is absolutely right. That's important and central to all of this. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. I feel an immense amount of joy and being a part of this, and I feel very grateful to have an outlet to be able to do some positive work for the community. So thank you.
It's really changed my life. I'll have to tell you that, for the good.
Thank you, Blake.
And I think a couple of us talked about this, that we've really created a safe place to be able to bounce stuff off each other and not worry about repercussions, or if you are uncomfortable with something, it's a good place to start talking about it, to get comfortable, like Brandon said, to get out of the box, your comfort zone or whatever. And I think, you know, I've come a long way in just 4 months, and can't wait to see what another 4 months does. And,
Yeah.
I'm just really appreciative of this group, and I know pretty much all of us are pretty open to, you know, involving others in this work at this point. And so my arms are open, is what I'm saying. Come on in. Let's let's have coffee. Let's have a chat. So
Great.
I second, third, fourth, all of what is said, and additionally add, if you're thinking about it, have questions, Brad's pretty approachable. He won't bite hard. You know, we in order to, I mean, this is our pilot program here. We have no intentions of going anywhere far except expanding, and not just in terms of, you know, participation, but in terms of the outreach and the outcomes and this. And in order to accomplish what we quite frankly we need to accomplish, we need to have different people, because with different people are different perspectives and different experiences. We are all very white, and that is a little problematic at the least. So I'm not saying, you know, if you're non-white, come. If you're white, come. You know, we will accept any and everybody. And if that's incorrect, Brad, I apologize. But to do the work, I don't want to be like Uncle Salmon, but we need you desperately. Please.
Yep, very good.
Yes, we do. And so with that, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Again, a heavy conversation, painful topic, but one that is so important to have. And hopefully this maybe inspires you to have a conversation about this topic. And feel free to reach out. We wish you all the best, you, your families. Please be well, be safe, and be healthy. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.